For those of you, just note that the session will be recorded. So if you are unhappy with that, then maybe just keep your video off. We do record the video because there's lots of people that can't join the session. So for those of you who watch afterwards, we hope you will have the same amount of learning, but it's always great to see real faces on the screen as well. So Lazan, you the only brave one between me and Marita to see your face. Guys, and sorry, you can't unmute yourself because often, Ria, thank you. I can see your image. That's great to see you. We do have a setting that you can't unmute yourself just to help and control the amount of background distraction that often can happen. So I've been in previous Zoom calls where it becomes quite crazy at the back end because we always seem to maybe unmute by accident or whatever. So you can't unmute yourself. But nevertheless, please, the chat box is there. Please use the chat box. You can use it throughout the session. I will be talking and sharing information with you, but Marita, as a co-facilitator, will actually be covering any questions that come up. So please do feel free to do that. Maybe if we can share, where in the world are you guys currently, so that we just know who's signing in from where. So can we have an idea, where are people from? Where in the world are you from? It's always nice to see. And this is the beauty of online and Zoom and operating in the digital world. We can actually tap into people across the world. Ria, you're from Somerset West. That's just around the corner from me. That's awesome. I'm in Cape Town, South Africa. Lizanne, you're in Edinburgh, Scotland, but I know you're an ex-Cape Townian. Liana is in Pretoria. Marita obviously is in George, Reshma in Gauteng. Good. So we've got a lot of South Africans on the call, but usually we've got a lot of people across the world, but so happy that you are here with us. Okay, today we're going to share sensory intelligence with you, and I've taken the theme around relationships. Now, those of you who have done our comprehensive course, you know that we spent, 26 hours of time going through this material, the science and the theory. So there's so much to be said about the work that we do. So we just literally choose slices of topics if we do our free events, just to give you a little bit of a teaser and a taste of what it is that we are doing and how can this in particular be impactful and beneficial for relationships. So that's the focus for today. Ria, thank you for putting your video on. We do like that. I had a meeting earlier today and someone said, why do people keep their videos off when they do some of the Zoom calls? We were talking about Zoom and digital fatigue. And the key thing is, for some of you, keeping your video off means that your brain doesn't need to use two channels of information. So it does help to limit the amount of sensory overload that we potentially can incur on Zoom calls. But it's always great for us to see your faces, because then we don't feel so lonely and it feels like we're reaching out to people just a little bit closer. Okay, guys, so as I said, I'm going to take you through the relationship key to sensory intelligence in a very brief way. So I'm going to share my screen with you. So at least you don't just need to listen to me. You also have some visuals on the background that just helps to make it more manageable. They do say death by PowerPoint, but I guess in the digital world, we have to combine the sensory systems together. Let me just move my Zoom bar a little bit. I'm going to keep it there for now. Okay, so this introduction is usually aimed at HR coaches, therapists, wellness practitioners, anyone who works with other people, interested in other people, and want to improve your own understanding of the human behavior field, which we all know is quite complex. It's very vast. There's so many things happening here. And we just add one particular insight and slice into understanding human behavior, but we obviously want to take you a little bit through this journey. Cool. So what am I going to do today? I only have an hour, and I want to make sure that I leave a little bit of time for you for questions as well. So a little bit of an introduction. For those of you who had the introduction before, it's good to repeat it anyway, because how does the brain learn best is through repetition anyway. So I'll take you through a little bit of the science behind sensory thresholds, because that is what we're going to focus on. How does sensory thresholds impact relationships? And then I know Alison, our support person, have given you access to our sensory quiz. That is our free, quick assessment to just have an idea what is potentially most likely to be your sensory style, because then you can make the information personal. For those of you who've done our full version, obviously you don't necessarily need to do the quiz, but it helps to get that self-awareness part to how does this play out in your own life, because this is the key learning. If you can relate to it personally, it's much easier to relate this information through to your clients. And then we're going to talk relationships. It's quite a fascinating and a really nice part of the work that we do. And how do we use the sensory tree for relationships, which we know is quite a non-threatening, easy, and very popular analogy in the sensory intelligence world. And then I thought to share a little bit of case studies with you. I think making it real is really where we can find what value this add to people if we look at relationships. Then I thought to share with you, I'm sure you guys know about this. The longest study ever ran in history of science has been done for 75 years, and they've done this on war veterans. I'm not going to show you those videos, but please go look at it. The one is just an introduction video, and the next one is by Robert Waldinger. He was the kind of the guy involved in this particular study. And then they actually looked through these guys over a period of 75 years, measuring what is the key indicator for health, well-being, and longevity. And the thing that they came up with this particular study is relationships, and obviously the quality of your relationships. But it's really, really fascinating to look at. So I please want to encourage you, if you haven't seen these video clips before, particularly the next one. The first one I think is 3 minutes, and Robert Waldinger's talk is about 12 minutes. Go read through it and listen through it. It's really, really fascinating. But it does, bottom line, tells us that the quality of our relationship is the biggest indicator for not just physical health, but also spiritual, emotional, and mental health as well. So I think it's such a fascinating study and scientific piece of work to use as a baseline or use as a framework. Why is relationship so important? Because it's got such a big impact on our health and well-being. So where do we fit in this whole equation? For us, it's all about self-awareness. And I must admit, I worked in the sensory processing field. I've been working it for over 30 years now. But it was only when I shifted my application and my work towards the adult world did I put 2 and 2 together for myself. Did I make real fundamental insights on my own life personally? And it empowered me to work with my clients in a much different way. So self-awareness is really, really critical. That's what we are aiming for. The more self-aware you are, if you are self-aware firstly, and then have awareness of others, and then going to understanding that we've got individual differences. Everyone is different. That's the key thing. Understanding individual differences, accepting individual differences, and then obviously nurturing these individual differences. Sorry, guys, there's a fly on my desk, and Marita will know I hate flies. I'm never auditory sensitive, but there's a fly around, I go a bit crazy. So if I wipe, that's the fly on my desk. But going back to this, so important. And what we use here, through understanding sensory thresholds, we can really understand relationships in a very, very different way. And through that, we build understanding and we build compassion. I'm going to use something so simple and so easy. We know one group of people want the radio on the radio or the music louder, and another part wants to please turn it off, shut it down, it's too noisy. So that's such an easy fundamental way to start to look at sensory thresholds and how do they play out in relationships. Or going to the movies, to a real movie theater. I'm not talking watching movies in your own home. Some people really get annoyed if people talk or they scratch in their popcorn boxes. Well, the others are totally oblivious to it, and they are most likely the ones making all the noise. So our sensory thresholds preempt certain behaviors and actions, and then obviously irritations as a result. And that level of dissonance between people often create a lot of conflict, and without really understanding where are they coming from. So this is a real great way to understand why do we respond differently to certain environments, and how does that impact our day-to-day relationships. So that's really what we are after here. So what is sensory intelligence? To take you through that, we look at the senses and the 7 senses, and intelligence suggests that we need to know, understand, and use them. Now, sensory intelligence doesn't mean you're not good enough. You need to improve your sensory intelligence, or we do assessments to understand your thresholds. There's no right or wrong with thresholds. You can have low thresholds, you can have medium thresholds, you can have high thresholds. It doesn't matter. There's no right or wrong. You don't need to improve your thresholds. You don't need to elevate your assessment score. No, not at all. Sensory intelligence suggests that by doing your thresholds, understanding your thresholds, you will be better equipped at managing yourself and managing people around you. That is what intelligence suggests here. What we do, Marita and I have occupational therapists. We used to work in health sciences for many, many years. In our previous lives, we did a lot of clinical work. We did a lot of work with neurodiversity. We did a lot of work with children who were struggling with ADHD and autism and sensory issues. But we've totally gone 180 degrees using sensory processing as a modality, which is across the board relevant for every single person, regardless of who you are. There's no right or wrong necessarily. So our aim is to train, develop, and empower people in understanding sensory intelligence and sensory processing. So we do assessments, workshops, and we also do coaching, one-to-one coaching. Marita more than I do. I don't do any one-to-one coaching anymore. And then we also have a big group of licensed users that also we refer some of our one-to-one clients to, so that you just know from that point of view. What is our focus? We explore, understand, and use the interaction between the human brain and the environment. Very, very important. The interaction between the human brain and the environment, because that interaction gets filtered and processed through the 7 senses. That is how environmental stimuli reaches the human brain, and particularly the cortical area, so that we can use it for performance and everything. So it's the focus between these 2 interactions. Why? What's the value? Firstly, there's a huge benefit here from a health and well-being point of view. There's ample studies correlating sensory processing and mental health potential problems. So we can use your sensory threshold to determine your risk for mental health, and then obviously give suggestions and help accordingly. The second one is productivity. Oh, and the first session that we have, we focus on mental health and well-being. The previous session that we've done, I think in January, we talked about remote working and productivity. Your sensory system facilitates fundamentally a lot of your attention, a lot of your arousal level. And we know we can use the senses to influence arousal and attention. So it's got a direct but quite fundamental impact on workplace productivity. And then the one that we are unpacking today is it has an impact on our relationships, understanding why do we make certain choices, why do we have certain habits, and then also how does this differ to people that we work with or people that we live with, and how can we use these insights to have more harmony between our relationships. So that's the focus for today. But basically, it's a basic body-brain response that we are unpacking. And I'm not going to go through the science behind it. The science is vast, it's complex, it's very multifaceted, but it really looks the brain, the senses, the environment. How do all of these functions interplay, interact with one another so that they facilitate actions and behavior? So this is quite a fundamental image to explain how does sensory intelligence work. I am going to, let me just hide my Zoom channels here. So that's the human brain. And obviously the human brain is extremely complex and again, very multifaceted, but our senses impact the way that we work, the way that we live and learn, and obviously our relationship as well. So the sensory stimulation, as I said, come from outside of the brain. They're not generated inside the brain. They are generated outside of the brain through visual, auditory, touch, smell, and taste, and then movement have 2 senses. I'll elaborate on that just now. But they're sitting at the bottom here in that barcode idea, because it's different for all of us. We don't respond similarly to sensory input based on our thresholds. And that little circle there is quite fundamental, because that is suggesting your spinal cord. And information enters the brain at the spinal cord. There's not a direct entry level into the executive brain. We can't get to the executive brain directly. Information enters the brain through a sensory channel, through the lower part of the brain, and then gets fed up into the executive brain for use, for action, for performance, for productivity. So it's a little bit of that baseline responses that happen before we can even think or respond. I'm sure all of you can think about a previous time where you said something or do something to realize a split second later, oops, wrong thing. I shouldn't have said that. I shouldn't have done that. It suggests exactly that hierarchy within the brain. The lower part of the brain is fast, automatic, intuitive. The executive part of the brain, the higher end of the brain, is where we think, we plan, we reason. But this lower part of the brain has been designed to be reflexive, to be automated, and to protect us. And that same part of the brain often can get us in the hot water when we over-respond or we're impulsive, because we haven't necessarily thought about something, because the primitive brain doesn't have thinking capacity. It only has sense and then acting quite fast. Those of you who's very much into books, I hope you've read the book Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. Fabulous book. And it really talks about these two parts of the brain and brain function quite explicitly. So the 7 senses, let me take you a little bit through it. Seeing and hearing, visual and auditory, those are our information senses. We process most of our information through these 2 channels. And yes, they are being overloaded. And even with us being on a Zoom call now, yes, I am overloading your visual and your auditory sense. So that's why, even though it's great for you to keep your video on, if you choose not to, we know it also helps the end user or the person on the other end to control the amount of input. So that's also cool. But we are overloading these 2 senses quite significantly. Touch, smell, and taste are our social senses. Touch is in the skin, and the skin, particularly in the sense of touch, is critical from a relationship point of view, because we've got skin from the top of our heads right down to the soles of your feet. And your touch thresholds, in other words, how sensitive or not sensitive you are to touch, is a predictor of your body space. Do you have a big body space, so your bubble is big, don't come into my space? Or do you have a small body space, touching and feeling people? Touch is also a key social sense. That's how we connect. That's how we engage. That's how babies develop their first nurturing response with the mother, the relationship with the mother. So the touch system is really, really critical in bonding, nurturing, and in relationships, obviously. And then smell and taste works together with that. Smell, the preferential sense of the brain, fast response, and then taste is anything that goes through the mouth. Smell and taste is chemical senses. Touch here has got much more of an impact on relationship and social connections. And in general, I think also post-COVID and what has happened with the world, we have become somewhat touch deprived. We were very much touch deprived when we were in lockdown during COVID. And there was a lot of loneliness that was experienced, particularly at that time, but it does seem to be a trend that has been increasing globally and worldwide. If you just look at loneliness, and if you Google that, you would be really, really interested to see how much work and research are there being done. And the opposite of loneliness is engagement with other people. And we use these senses quite explicitly without knowing so in our relationship with others. Then the movement sense is the one that often throw people. That's sense number 6 and 7. Vestibular proprioception, one sits in your inner ear. The vestibular system is your body's GPS. Gives you feedback of where you are in space, works together with proprioception in your muscles and in your joints. These 2 senses are critical because they are our regulation senses. Every time when we move the body, when we move a muscle, we actually reset arousal and attention in the brain. So movement is medicine, and I know movement in particular is a huge has been used, also studied extensively, that helps with attention and also mental health. So, but also remember that your regulation senses, we are also movement deprived. Just with us sitting, we sit and we don't move around that much. But those are the 7 senses in a very quick nutshell. But in particularly the touch, smell, and taste, but in particular touch is a key one to remember here, because it plays a big role in how we manage our relationships. So just going a little bit back to that, contextualizing these 2 parts of the brain. The top part of the brain is conscious, controlled, and calculated. We reason, we think, we learn, and we perform. I've mentioned that. The bottom part of the brain is more unconscious, uncontrolled, and intuitive. This is where our gut habits, preferences, and comfort levels occur. And if you are going back to Daniel Kahneman's work, only 20% of brain activity gets allocated to thinking, reasoning, and actions, where about 80% of brain activity rests in this lower part of the brain. So there's a lot more going on in these subcortical primitive neural structures in the brain than there are at the top part of the brain. So very important that we understand the impact of these primitive structures into day-to-day behaviors and day-to-day actions. And again, this results in attention, emotion, and behavior. I always say, what are the 3 things that we influence through sensory intelligence? Attention, and attention is critical to performance and productivity. Emotion, we know that plays havoc in relationships, and behavior is a combination of how we use those 2 things to actually show up on a day-to-day basis. So just putting it into perspective for you. So IQ, and I'm so glad IQ is not important anymore. Is it not important? We try to say it's not important. I guess it will always be important, but less emphasis, which is great. EQ, emotional intelligence, in the middle part of the brain. But sensory intelligence is really going a level down. What happens in these primitive parts where there's a lot of sensory processing that occurs? You know, you can't really split the brain so exactly in those 3 parts, but it more or less give you a functional focus of where those areas lie. And again, the environment plays such a strong role in understanding this dynamic. I often share this with clients because it seems to be making a lot more sense. If we look at psychometrics, typically from mid to top part of the brain, the Myers-Briggs or StrengthsFinder or Insights Profile or the Enneagram, there's so many type of assessment tools that we can use to understand the executive part of the brain. But what we are doing is looking at your sensory styles, which refers more to the lower primitive part of the brain. So I just think it's important to show that variation. This is definitely how we are different, although not opposite, but different to your psychometrics and your personality traits. Complementary for sure, but also looking at different parts of the brain. Okay. So good so far, Marita. We don't have any questions. I'm going to take a sip of my coffee, and this fly is still here. All right. I thought to give you 2 images here. That's image number 1. That's a busy restaurant. Or I think it's a busy restaurant according to, well, I asked Google, give me an image of a busy restaurant. And that was the one that I thought. It looked quite busy. There's a lot of visual detail. There's obviously a lot of people. So if you imagine yourself in that space, it would be quite engaging, quite active, quite, you know, I guess loud. If it's Cape Town restaurants, they will definitely be loud. I don't know why restaurants can't get that right. It is often quite loud. So say that's picture number 1 versus picture number 2. Picture number 2 is a lot more containment. There's a booth, and there's obviously much better noise absorption properties in this particular image. So I'm just giving you kind of 2 extremes so that you have an idea. Picture 1 is most probably the busier, the more engaging, the louder, the more active driven type of restaurant, while restaurant number 2 here, more contained, and particularly if you've got the booth. So let's look at the booth. So if you have to look at those pictures, would you prefer picture number 1 or would you prefer picture number 2? Don't think too much about it. Let's see what you guys say. Do you prefer picture number 1 or picture number 2? Let's see who's brave enough. Who wants to go? Number 1, Rashma, you want to do 2. Liana, 2. Let's see. Oh, Lizanne, you would say something in between. Good, good. So picture number 1 or picture number 2. So we've got Reshma, we've got Liana, Lizanne would be in between. Dave or Ria, what would you do? Picture number 1 or picture number 2? 2. Dave, you would go for 2. Okay. And Ria, 1 or 2?
2.
2. Okay. 2 as well. Okay, brilliant. So it's interesting. From 1, 2, 3, 4 guys, you all would go for picture number 2. Lizanne would say something in between. Okay. And I'll share a little bit of that. Marita, what would be yours?
I'm waiting for the image that's outside.
Okay, you have to choose 1 or 2. You can't be that choosy.
I'd go for 2.
Go for 2, and I obviously would go for 1. So I'm going to share a little bit of our own referencing for threshold, but it's a great way to just, so imagine you are a couple and want to go to a restaurant. And I can tell you now, so if Marita and I need to go and have a business meeting somewhere because we work together, I would definitely go for number 1, and Marita would definitely go for number 2. So how do we firstly understand that and navigate? Why do we have these different choices? Because at the end of the day, we need to make sure that the experience that you have is a positive experience, is a comfortable experience, because it doesn't help you go out to a restaurant, particularly if you go out with, someone close in your life. You don't want to walk out of the restaurant that night and have a fight or, go home. You should go out and have a good time before you go back home. So I'm just using restaurants here, guys. There are, I want to say I guess it's not millions, but there are thousands and thousands of examples how we make different choices based on what works for your sensory systems, based on your thresholds, because we want your brain to feel comfortable. We want your brain to have a fun experience and not feel overloaded. So I think this is just a nice example to use that. So if we look at sensory assessments, obviously if I talk about sensory threshold, it means, okay, so how do I know what I am? Do I have low thresholds? Do I have medium thresholds? Do I have high thresholds? Do I have something in between? That's what we do when we look and we establish sensory thresholds. Are you sensitive on the one end, or are you more seeking on the other end? So this is what we are trying to obtain here. What's your level of sensory sensitivity? And again, there's no right or wrong. Sensory sensitive isn't right and sensory seeking is wrong, or vice versa. There is just no right and wrong here. It's really understanding my brain works differently to yours. I have different needs. That's why this environment doesn't work for me, but that one does, and vice versa. And it's actually frighteningly simple. And yes, maybe I oversimplify. I have been criticized for oversimplifying things, but I do think there's such a marvel in taking complexity and making it simple. And simplicity is one of our core values. And I think the theory that we are unpacking here is highly complex. It's very, very multifaceted from a neuroscientific point of view. And there's loads and loads and loads of research, but at the end of the day, so what? What does it really mean? And that's what I'm trying to do always in the simplicity. So we've asked you to do the sensory quiz, and I'm sure all of you have done that. It's for free on our website. No, it's not standardized, but it's a great way to get an idea of your own sensory thresholds. But then also the sensory matrix is a comprehensive assessment that I've designed and I've done through research on to try to establish what are your thresholds and how can you predict discomfort or comfort or sensitivity or seeking so that you can understand yourself better. Sensors on Call is another assessment. I've done my PhD in the call center space, and I've designed this tool in 2008, and it was to establish who can work in a call center and who can't, because I don't know about you, we talk to them on the phone a lot. It is a beehive. It is a crazy environment. And then we're about to launch Sensors at Work, which is a tool to establish, should you work a bit more from home? Should you work more at the office? Or should you have that hybrid mix? Because it all goes around what environment is most suitable for you. Okay. And then we come up with the sensory tree. Now, the sensory tree is an analogy that I've designed gosh, I don't know. I think in 2005, it was ages ago, but it's quite fundamental. And people often don't remember anything about the work that we do, but they remember the sensory tree because it is a real nice and an easy analogy to understand where am I from a sensory threshold point of view. So if we think about leaves, the leaves of a tree, they're brown, they're green, they grow. They've got the birds, the butterflies, the bees. There's lots of activity in the leaves. We also know when are the seasons changing. And that is, we relate the leaves of a tree the same as your sensory seekers, people with high thresholds. They always are up somewhere in the tree. They're moving with the wind. They visit with the birds, the butterflies, and the bees, just giving that as an analogy. Well, then we've got the trunk in the middle that makes sure that what happens in the leaves and in the root gets combined together. And that's often our sensory neutrals, people that are in between. We call those people with medium thresholds versus our roots. Our roots are sensory avoiders. This group has got more low thresholds. And based on your answer on the restaurants, I'm assuming, I might be wrong, but I'm assuming that most of you guys here in this group, I don't know, Kate, we haven't heard back from you, and not Lizanne and me, but definitely Marita, Dave, Ria, Reshma, Liana. I'm assuming that you have lower thresholds, but I mean, I'm not exactly sure. But look, think about roots of a tree. They're deep down in the ground. It's cool, it's calm, it's quiet. There's the odd earthworm, but there's not a lot of activity, and they keep the tree very much rooted and grounded, and they make sure that all the lovely nutrients from the soil and the water gets actually permeated through the roots so that the tree can grow. And it's a really nice analogy to work with people. Are you a root? Are you a trunk? Or are you a leaf? And this is the words and the terminology that we also use if we work with groups or teams or families. It's non-threatening. There's no right or wrong. And I'll obviously take you through this journey. Now, it's interesting, sorry, guys, I'm a little bit of a nerd when it comes to science. Pre-COVID, looking at all the data samples that we've been doing, 25% of people were more low thresholds. If you are high B scores means if you've done your course and you had more higher on B, then you are a sensory avoider. 39% were neutrals and 36% were more the leaves, the higher threshold group. Now, after COVID, post-COVID, we've done, and this sample here is say for instance, there's about, because I'm trying to look at all the data together, this is about 2,000 data sets. Then what we've done post-COVID, we actually took all of the data that we had on our system and we analyzed it, and it was 4,500. So it's about double the amount of data. And we've seen an increase. We've seen 40% are more rooties, more sensory sensitive type of behaviors. This is quite similar, 38%, but we only had about 22% of the leaves. Now, I don't want to go too much into the data because that's not what we are about today, but I think there's various reasons for it. We have had many more practitioners who've been using our tool post-COVID, because I think post-COVID, we've also seen an increase in anxiety. We've seen an increase in depression. If you look at the World Health Organization, there's a 25% increase in both depression and anxiety. That sample potentially ended up in our sample. I'm sure. So I do think there might be some influences here, but it does mean the world, we're trying to shy away from the busyness of the world. So I don't want to read too much into it, but I just think it's really, really interesting. Watch this space, because we'll possibly analyze this data and then publish as we go on with this. But what does it mean for you as a person? Just a little bit, sensory styles in action. So it's the leaves. They would say, yeah, we can do this. If you think they're in a discussion or they're planning a holiday together, the leaves will say, yes, let's do it, or go. And then people might be asking, but they might even missing the messages. High threshold seeking type of brains are always busy with something else. So they often miss information, but they're always thinking of the next step. The roots at the bottom will say, no, we can't do that. We can't go there because of this or this or this. And no, this will be too noisy, or that will be too loud. Very much here. Or have you considered this, or have you considered that? So they get wrapped up in the devil is in the detail. So they would preempt, think about a lot more detail. And the leaves will just say, man, let's just go with it. And thank goodness The trunks in the middle will say, okay, let's mediate between the two. Let's think about what the roots are saying. Let's think about what the leaves are saying. And then they usually have got capacity to naturally navigate between these two opposing groups. We are talking about the outliers, or the people that lie on the ends, because this is where the information gets really, really interesting. So obviously, I hope all of you had a chance to do your quiz. So maybe if we can share, Marita, do we know what the group's thresholds are like? Did we share anything? Did anyone share anything? Okay, if you've done the quiz, if we just go on your, it's wrong, but I mean, I would love for you to do the quiz. Your overall score is -16. Okay, Kate, so you've done the full sensory matrix, which means you're a root. Lizanne, I think you're a trunk. Am I right? I can't remember. Marita's a root. I'm a leaf. So those of you, I don't know if Liana and Reshma have done their full matrix or have done the quiz. So this will give you an idea of what your thresholds are like. So what does it mean? Because as we unpack these behaviors, you'll tie and make the connections for relationship. High threshold are our sensory seekers. They prefer engaging, busy, active environments. They can get distractible. They get bored pretty quickly. They love change. They enjoy change. And they typically are high risk takers. These are the people that often run those red lights, or, don't pay their parking tickets. They've got a tendency to avoid or dislike detail. They don't like structure and rules because it often feels like it boxes them too much. They say yes quickly because they're doing, yes, let's just do it. And they often say yes. I'm making assumptions here, but it really is quite accurate. They can be poor listeners, and I'm a little bit guilty because they've got so many thoughts going on in their heads or going on to the next thing that they don't listen to what's being said. So in relationships, not always, but they potentially can be the group that doesn't listen that well. And they wants to be just out there. Let's just go on to the next thing. They have a bit of FOMO, fear of missing out, because their brains are always ready for the next adventure. And yes, they do have higher risk for substance abuse, aggression, reckless behaviors, and potentially affairs. I'll come back to this when we talk about a case study, because that come up in a case study that I want to share with you. These are documented and proven through research. The research are quite clear. High threshold people are more prone to these type of behaviors. It doesn't mean it will happen. There's just a higher risk. So if your sensory needs are not being met, those could potentially be the risk that this group can fall into. If we look at the opposite end, and it seems like a lot of people in this group seems to be more of our roots, they are sensory avoiders, more low thresholds. They prefer contained, quiet, and calm environments. That's why I gave you the picture of the busy restaurant and the noisy restaurant, the busy restaurant and the calm restaurant. They can also get distractible, but due to distractibility or overload or feeling overwhelmed. Our leaves also get distractible, but they get bored. If it's not interesting enough, let's just move on. The avoiders also get distracted, but because they experience overstimulation and overload. They don't like change. They avoid it because they want to be prepared, and they typically are low risk takers. They're very good at detail, structure, and rules, and they would be the one that says no quickly. And no for them doesn't necessarily mean no. They're just much more deeper thinkers. So they would first look at all the options before they would give an answer. And I promise you guys, this yes and no is quite fundamental and quite simplistic, but I can't tell you how much havoc it's created in my own personal life, because I'm obviously a yes, and believe it or not, I don't know why we do that to ourselves. My husband is the no, the root. But if we can appreciate this and know where it comes from, we actually start to manage this very differently. And the roots are, I need to give you that benefit. Typically, are not always, you are really good listeners, because you are more intuitive. You read between the lines. So you listen because you really want to understand what goes on. So typically, roots are better listeners. And I don't want to make this assumption, but I've seen this over and over and over in the groups that we've worked with. People in the helping profession, therapists, coaches, do tend to have capacity to be more on the rooty side. It doesn't mean that you can't do that if you're a leaf, of course not. But being a root means you are more intuitive, and your listening skills are often just more enhanced, okay? They enjoy their own space and they want to be home. They don't want to be out there. This is the person on a Friday night. I'm not going out. I want to put my feet up, order a pizza and binge on Netflix. Where the leave will go, where are we going? What new place can we go to? Organize with everyone and go to not just one place, but even go for drinks before and then to a restaurant. It's just how we are wired. We need different things. So really important. They experience a bit of JOMO. JOMO is joy of missing out. They're happy to miss out because really I can't or don't want to get wrapped up in everything that goes on in the world. However, they do have a high risk for mental health issues, anxiety, depression. It's also very clearly documented in the research. But if you start to look at these two ends, you know, talking about leaves and talking about roots, high threshold and low thresholds, they've got totally opposite intuitive behavior trends because they're responding to environmental stimuli, and those responses predict certain choices, actions, and behavior. And it's contrasting to each other. And I've had this discussion so many times over the years. Why do we always choose someone on the opposite end? Well, I do think opposites do attract. And then if you look at if you are parenting, for those of you who are parents or maybe working with parents, it adds a wonderful dynamic into being two opposite ends of the sensory threshold points or continuum if you need to parent, because the one parent is more overstimulatory, the leaves, and the root parent is a lot more cautious and protective. But there's a lot more, obviously, to think about. And then, thank goodness, we've got the medium threshold, our trunks in the middle. They are our sensory neutrals. Your focus and attention is appropriate. They get distracted, but can also focus. Their brains has got more capacity to filter. You know, you want to say 50-50, not quite, but they don't get overloaded that quickly, and they also don't seek out that quickly. For them, change is really measured and calculated. They're quite adaptable and flexible. They are naturally very good mediators because they can understand two different parts to a particular story. They're flexible with space. Space doesn't have that much of an influence, and they would say yes when yes is needed and no when no is needed. And they've got a mix of FOMO and JOMO. Sometimes they've got a joy of missing out and sometimes fear of missing out. The one big thing about this group is, Marita, and I'll ask that question now, they're not very expressive about their own needs. So this is the one, I would say, risk factor for trunks and neutrals, because they're so naturally able to navigate between two separate groups. They often would be focused on solving other people's problems and then disregarding their own needs. So they can also be seen as a little bit of a pleaser. Marita?
Just quickly, Dave mentioned, I said I'm a root, I like the solitude, but to be out there, I'm definitely a leaf. I wonder maybe if you can just mention the fluctuation when you do get people who needs a little bit of both.
Okay, so sorry, because of time frames, I've talked about low thresholds, medium thresholds, and high thresholds. So obviously you can be a root, but have high threshold for the movement system, okay, or for multisensory, which does mean when there's movement or multisensory involved, you become a seeker and you would seek that out, okay? So because remember, in the quiz, we just measure an overall picture. If we do the sensory matrix, we measure all your systems. So you could be low threshold in one system and high threshold in another system, which is wonderful, which is also, for instance, why I've designed the sensory matrix, because I've been using a very old standardized tool for a very long time. And the definition and the differentiation and the nuances across each system is where we really help people to self-care, self-regulate, and self-manage. Because you might be a root, but you love to bungee jump or to skydive, which does mean you've got a high threshold for movement. And then we also have fluctuations. So you can also have fluctuations within one particular system. We also have people who's got low and high threshold, for instance, for visual, or low and high threshold for touch, because each of your sensory systems considers a variation of stimulation. For instance, the touch system takes in light touch, temperature, deep touch, movement on the skin. So there's various receptors at play within each of these systems so that they process different type of information. So we can even have fluctuations that occur. Dave, hopefully that has helped for you as well, to just brilliant. That's a very good question. Thank you for bringing that up. And then, for the trunks, sorry, guys, you can be a little bit of boring. Oh, I get so much flack for that, but think about it. The leaves got aggression, substance abuse. The roots have mental health, anxiety, and depression. So you guys will just have to live with boring. Not really, but because of that, it can be seen as a complacency, but it's actually a mediating and a flexibility element that plays a role here. All right, so that's just giving you groupings of the type of behaviors that is very prevalent among these groups. Obviously, there's so many variations and nuances, but it helps to understand it from that point of view. So just if we show you, if we work with a team, this is how we would display the results of a group that we've taken through the assessment. And then we would start to unpack, what does this mean for this group from a relationship point of view? There's obviously various ways we use the results for mental health, well-being, performance, productivity. But for this framework, I want to show you how we use it from a relationship point of view. And for instance, here, Jenny and Katie, Jenny being the lowest root and Katie being the highest leaf here, I'm going to make that assumption, even just looking at this, that there will be the most amount of differences between these two people. There might be more conflict, there might be more irritation, but boy, do they need to work together, because they bring very different strengths to a team playing field. I'm going to share some case studies with you because I think that it's become interesting. This was a client that I've worked with many, many years ago. It was a banking group, and it was a small group of people. They were running an they were in an IT support group for a big bank. And what was interesting, that is their real names. I've used their real names. You obviously won't know who they are. Otherwise, I can't remember because I've worked with so many people. These two people had a massive amount of disruption, irritation, and conflict between the two of them. What also happened, Neville was the lead of the team. He had his own office. Francois was sitting right next to him in a desk right outside of Neville's office. Neville was a root, calm, cool, quiet, calculated. They were doing IT, so brilliant. So Neville was really well suited for this. Francois was the lead, who was actually in combination doing more business support or talking to the business, or he was the go-between what the business needed and what the IT team needed. He was a leaf, noisy, loud. He was kind of this larger than life type of personality. And obviously Francois, if he was speaking on his phone, very loud, very noisy, just outside of Neville's office. So Neville couldn't stand Francois, and Francois, even didn't have an idea what was going on with Neville. So he had no ideas because he was just doing his own thing and moving from environment to environment. And then after we did our course and we unpacked this, Neville understood that Francois needed to be busy. He needed to be on the phone. He was actually really well suited to engaging with the business. And Neville was good in overseeing the IT team. What happened there? So firstly, there was an acknowledgement for why do we operate so differently? And then obviously, Francois, please, you shouldn't be sitting outside of Neville's office. So they moved Francois away to a different spot, furthest away from Neville's desk, which immediately reduced the overload, the irritation, the noise. So Neville found that he was a lot more contained, and he and Francois's relationship actually blossomed significantly purely by understanding that. And I'll never forget when Neville said, Annemarie, I wish I could put the monetary value that this insight has made for us as a team. It's been absolutely extraordinary. And I mean, they continue to work together for years and years and years, very harmoniously, very productively, in a very cohesive way. So, and it's the small things that actually can make such a big difference. And then obviously I'm going to share a little bit our story as a team, just because it's so close to my heart. And I can't not, because I think my aha moments over the years have come with my own growth, my own understanding of this. So obviously I'm the highest leafed in our team, and Marita is the lowest root. I'm really shocking at detail. I miss detail. I don't dot an I and cross a T. I hate to get wrapped up in spreadsheets. I can do a spreadsheet quickly, but then I need to move on. I get very bored with detail, and I avoid detail at all cost. Now, I'm sure all of you know whatever you do in any kind of a business system or process, you need someone who can drive and do it fast, and then you need someone to check the detail. Marita's brilliant at detail. I'm really bad at detail. So we've learned to supplement and appreciate each other's strengths. I do know also, for instance, if I've been on a call or in a training session, I would like jump and like, Marita, let's talk about this. And Marita, I'm like, time out. I've had a call now. Give me 10 minutes. So I've also learned when we finish with any type of engagement, in particular online engagement, I can't just bump on a call and start talking with her. I need to give her some time. So, which is how I also have learned to predict her needs. And I'm also quite aware of my level of overload and what I create. The other thing that both she and Fiona does project management for us. She is ex-IT, so she's brilliant from that point of view. They've also contained me and put me a little bit in a box because, you know what, I'm always out there and trying to explore all kinds of different things, which is good for the business. So that's why I run every Saturday on Table Mountain, because that is expanding my box so that I can think about it. Alison, our support person, has got a little bit more high threshold. So she's always the one rocking and rolling. Okay, what's next? What do you want me to do? Just briefly, there's so many layers to this, but it's a great way just to go through that and understand that. So in any working relationship where you have to unpack, why do we work together really well? And how do we actually implement this? It's a great way to understand frustration, understand conflict, manage these conflict and these frustrations, and actually build cohesion. Okay. It also helps. I, for instance, always want to pick up the phone and I want to phone Marita and say, I want to talk to you about this, this, and this. And then when I do that, I can hear Marita going quiet because she's busy processing it. So I've learned, no, don't phone her. So I'll send her a Slack message and say, okay, I think we need to do this and this and this. And when I've seen that she's read the message and she's gone through it, then I know I can phone her because then she had time to process it. Whereas before I would have just jumped stuff on her, which is not the right thing to do. So I also learned, how do I actually maximize people that I rely on heavily in our team? And obviously the same thing for the others as well. There's many more examples, but that's just one little bit of relationship case studies with life. We had a relationship coach who attended one of our workshops many years ago. And she had this couple that she was working with. Nancy had low thresholds, very rooty, wanted to stay at home, didn't want to go out a lot. John was very busy and engaging, had higher thresholds. High threshold needs is, I need to be out there, I need to experience things more, I need to explore new places, or I need to be challenged in my job. And as she was explaining and talking about this couple, I made the comment, I wouldn't be surprised if John would have an affair. And I don't know why I said that day. And then she looked at me and her mouth hung open and she said, John did have an affair. That's why I brought it in on that slide in the beginning. So obviously John shouldn't be having an affair, but because his sensory needs was not being met, I'm sure there were other things that played a role as well. He was not getting the variety in the activity that he needed. So he was, going more into a rooty space. And that was his bit of rebellious, give me more stimulation, that simplified or rolled over into an affair. I didn't stay in touch with that particular case, but it explained a lot of the behaviors that was happening. Someone else here, this is Garth and Lisa. Garth was a trunk. Lisa was a root. And I was actually asked to work with Lisa because of a mental health issue. And then when I went to Garth, and then Lisa asked me to get involved, and I said on one condition that Garth must be involved in the process. So I worked both with Lisa and Garth, and explaining to them, for instance, just one simple thing, but it was so powerful. They had 2 Jack Russells. They were Garth's Jack Russells, and he loved them. And they used to jump on their bed, and the Jack Russells used to lie on Lisa's pillow. And Lisa was touch sensitive and smell sensitive. And she hated the bloody Jack Russells ending up on her pillow. And going through that was an aha moment for Garth to realize, okay, it's not that Lisa don't like me or like my dogs. It's the smell and the hairs on her pillow that she just can't stand because her system goes into total autonomic nervous system overload. So purely by getting a pillow for the Jack Russells to sleep on their pillow and not on Lisa's pillow, so that they could have their own bed, made a huge difference just in the way that they were experiencing or exploring the amount of conflict situations that they have. And another one that's really, really great, this is actually someone that I know really well, Romy High Threshold and Dion Low Threshold. And I'm showing you because it's not gender specific. Romy, if she got bored, she would pick a fight with Dion. And she admitted to the fact that if she was bored and there was not going on a lot, she literally picked a fight with Dion, because if they were fighting, she was getting the stimulation that she wanted. Subconsciously, she didn't plan it. It doesn't happen cortically. It happened all unconsciously. Just some snippets of some of the case studies that I've been working with. And I just thought, sharing just some of these really practical ways on how it played out. And as I say, there's thousands of examples to this. So I don't know if there's any questions. We don't have much time left. I always seem to think we will have time for questions and then we don't. Marita, I don't know if there was any questions, but I'm sure you've manned them. Is that okay? If there are any questions, guys, you're so welcome to touch base with us afterwards. Pop us an email, connect with us. We would love to hear your questions or your comments or your answers. It's very hard for me to give relationship justice in an hour. This is an introduction. I just want to whet your appetite and explain to you how simple yet powerful this can be added when you leave this. We add this to what you're already doing. This isn't replacing other components. This isn't replacing other ways of looking at relationship, but it adds a very, very interesting dynamic. And those of you who wanted to read my book, you can always read my book. The first chapter of my book, or the introduction, I talk about a situation that I had between me and my husband. So I'm quite vocal about that, but it's been so powerful for me as a person. And to a certain extent, it also helped me to understand my husband so much better. Marita?
There's a good question from Liana. I'm a habit coach. Would leave struggle more than roots to form or break habits?
Interesting one. Liana, I don't know if there's any particular research on that. I do think both roots and leaf have got very particular habits. They're very opposing and they're very different. I think breaking a habit, we can possibly use cortical override to do that. So I believe the brain is neuroplastic and we always have capacity for change. The older we get, I think the harder it becomes. So if you're really motivated to break a habit, I'm sure all of us can, if we are motivated enough and if we put our minds to it. It depends what type of a habit. I don't think a root, if they have a habit of always preferring solitude, I'm going to make this very simplistic. They're not going to change their habits to always be the social animal to go out, because it goes fundamentally against their sensory needs. So I look, if it comes to sensory needs, I don't think we can really change those habits. I really, really believe that. I think this is fundamentally part of how we are wired. We can shift it a little bit. We can stretch a little bit. But if you're a root, you're not going to become a leaf, and vice versa. It's just impossible. And just on that note, guys, for those of you who haven't done the sensory matrix yet, Marita will share this with you. We've got a 30% discount for this group only until the end of March. If you want to go and explore that, the quiz is quick. The sensory matrix, you will get a 26-page report with a lot of information around each of your systems, strategies, and a lot of highlights around relationships, work, family. There's a lot of information about that. So please go ahead and do that. For those of you who haven't read my book, feel free to read my book. You can get it at Takealot or Amazon. And for those of you who are really interested in this, we do have a comprehensive course that runs online over a period of 6 weeks, where we do a deep dive, and it's really a deep dive into sensory intelligence and sensory processing for adults. We start with theory and application, we go through research, we go through the neuroscience, and then we also make it extremely practical. I know, Lizanne, thank you. You have been on our course, so you're a result of that, and it's great that we are seeing you again. So, guys, on that note, I just thought we love quotes, and I just thought this quote for me is really quite fundamental. The most basic of all human needs is to understand and to be understood. And the best way to understand people is to listen to them. And And I think in today's day and age, where we've got so much overload and so much endless streams of information, people will show you what their sensory needs are. If you look and if you listen in particular, we are able to pick that up. So I think it's quite fundamental. Another thing that we speak of in groups is stop, look, and listen. And I think if you want to improve your relationship, if you can start with those three: stop, let go of all the distraction, look, make eye contact, and then listen, I think we can actually solve a lot of our relationship dynamic. But I'm sure this has given you a great insight, even though just a quick overview on how do we apply sensory intelligence for relationships. Guys, it's over time. Thank you so much for being here. We really do appreciate your time, your attendance, your attention. Take care, and do feel free to stay in touch with us. Okay, cheers. Bye.